Look, hi everyone, and welcome. I'm Josh Marshall, General Manager of Crucial Dimensions, and it's really great to have you all with us for today's webinar, Conversations that Cultivate Wellbeing. For those that are new to Crucial Dimensions, we're the exclusive licensee of Crucial Learning's training programs in Australia and New Zealand. And our work focuses on helping individuals and organisations build the skills to communicate effectively, strengthen relationships, and really change crucial workplace behaviours to create, hopefully thriving workplace cultures, which we all need. When people have the skills, safety, and confidence to speak up, it really does foster trust, reduces stress, and builds a workplace where collaboration thrives. So, effective communication, what we'll talk about today, isn't just about talking. It's about creating an environment where people feel heard, valued, and empowered. And that's exactly what we're gonna touch on today with Emily. So we're really thrilled to have Emily Gregory with us, co-author of Crucial Conversations and a global expert in communication and behaviour change. Emily helps people, organisations develop the skills to have open, honest, and productive conversations, especially when the stakes are high, if you know what a crucial conversation is. In today's session, Emily's going to share practical strategies drawn from Crucial Conversations to help you reduce stress through open dialogue, build trust and connection to enhance psychological safety, and equip teams to collaborate fearlessly. And that's really important in what we talk about. Before we dive in, just a quick note that if you could just hold your questions until the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'll make sure to cover as many as we possibly can, but we will be utilizing the chat function. So if you have got something that gets prompted during the session, please pop it in there, and then we'll make sure that they come about when we go to the Q&A. So with that, enjoy. I'll hand it over to Emily, and she'll kick things off now. Thanks.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks, Josh. It's always so great to partner with you. Josh and I have long worked together and enjoy a great collaboration. So I'm just delighted to be here. I'd love to do this just to kick it off. If you would all open your chat and just chat in, where are you calling in from today? Where are you joining the webinar from today? So we can kind of get a sense of the breadth of where people are coming in from. So great, Ben from the Gold Coast. Wonderful, Faye, Adelaide. Got a lot of Melbourne, Bendigo, Brisbane, Perth, not alone there, Josh in Perth, Canberra, wonderful. Okay, so wow, we've got a lot of time zones there that we're covering, and a lot of oh, in Christchurch, wonderful, and a lot of geography there. So wonderful. I actually am in from Salt Lake City, Utah, in the States. Good morning to all of you. Good evening to me, but just delighted that we have this chance to connect. As Josh said, we are going to use the chat throughout as we get going, because I really want us to learn from each other and hear from each other on this incredibly important topic. So as we get started, just to kind of frame this up, I want to kind of start with just kind of a temperature gauge, really, as you think about your organization and where you are and how well you're doing in terms of creating psychosocial safety and that employee well-being in the workplace, and creating those workplaces that really allow our employees and our people to thrive. So I have a quick little poll here. This is not scientific, right? There's no, decimal points involved. But what I'd like you to do is just say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are we doing, right? This is such an important topic that so many of you and of us have been working on. Like, how are we doing? Let's take our temperature here really quickly and get a sense from this group how we're feeling. So again, 1, we are not doing well. It is a terrible place. We have accomplished nothing. 10, we have created just a gold standard for what a psychosocially safe workplace looks like. All right, so I love these coming in. We've got just about half of you. I'm going to give you a few more of you a little bit of time to respond, and then we'll take a look and see from this group how well we're doing. Okay, looks like I will go. I am going to, just for time, go ahead and cut this off. So if you haven't responded to the poll yet, apologies, but let me go ahead and end the poll and share these results. So you can see we almost have just a beautiful bell curve distribution here. Really, really nice. It looks like maybe just a little bit over halfway there in the peak of our bell curve, somewhere right around 6 or so, between that 5, 6, and 7, but a lovely bell curve. If you are the person that put number 10, we are awesome. I would love you to claim that, like put it into chat, say, I am 10 and this is where I work. And we will all look to learn from you, and people will probably want to reach out, and just well done on that person who said number 10. So, okay. But taken as a whole, we've got a little work to do here in creating these psychosocial workplaces. Now, as you think about this, this is part 2 of the question. And in fact, I'm going to share a second poll here to just gather a little more information and see how people are feeling. As you think about the key criteria that create and that define a psychosocially safe workplace, the things we need to have in order to have psychosocial safety in the workplace and to create a truly an environment of thriving and employee well-being, where would you say you most need to improve? So if you scored yourself a 5, which of these criteria would you need to improve on to move up to a 6 or 7 or an 8, right? If you scored yourself an 8, what would it take to get to a 9? Which are the areas that are trickiest? I'll give you a moment. I know that's a lot to read over, so I'll give you a moment to answer that poll, and then we'll look at again kind of how this group is doing. Great. We have a lot of great answers coming in. As it seems like most of you have realized, you can choose more than one. It doesn't just have to be one response there. Okay. And again, I know I don't have all of you, and some of you may still be responding, but we've got about almost 3/4 now responding. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this down just for time. And again, apologies if you didn't get your response in. Feel free to chat in any thoughts you have on that. But let me share just so you can see kind of how you're doing compared to how others have rated themselves. Very much across the board, I would say. There doesn't seem to be huge. I mean, we've got just a nice distribution here. It looks like, right, we're winning on access to mental health resources and employee support. Not very many of you said that's the area where we really need big improvement. So I'm going to hope we can take that as a win. And then effective stress and workload management. That's the place, right? Clear role expectations and job demands. Those things are so critical and so challenging. It doesn't necessarily surprise me. This is often what we see when we talk to groups about how well they're doing on these various criteria. Because in some ways, if you think about it, and let's maybe just look at those 2 that we have back to back of access to mental health resources and effective stress and workload management. If you think about which of those is sort of, I would say, easier to accomplish, great, let's put mental health resources together. Let's create a website. Let's get a helpline. Like, these are projects that we can do and say they're done. And so we tend to go to those first, which is valuable and important. But when it comes to effective stress and workload management, these are tricky, complex issues with lots of varying tension states pulling at one another. And so not surprising that we see those are the laggards, if you will, on the things that we really need to move the needle for. But I love that, because those are the kinds of things, those tricky, sticky, very challenging issues are the ones we want to talk about today. And to frame up our conversation, as you look at this list of psychosocially safe workplace criteria, I want to ask you this question for you to reflect on. Which of these can you accomplish? Which of these can you make progress on? Which of these can you resolve and move forward on without holding a conversation? Trick question, of course. Probably the answer is none. We can do almost none of this until we can start communicating and having some of these tough, difficult conversations. What we have found over the last 30 years in our work at Crucial Learning and with Crucial Dimensions is this key truth. The health of a relationship, a team, or an organization is the function of the average lag time between identifying and discussing problems. Right now, think about that. We go into organizations and we're trying to measure and test and tension test or stress test just how healthy they are. And the number one thing we look at is that lag time between how long it takes from identifying to discussing, not resolving, but discussing a problem. Because said another way, our ability to create workplaces of well-being is dependent upon our ability to hold really tough conversations, to talk about really tough topics. We have to be able to work through those conversations if we're ever going to kind of create the transformational work environments we want. And so that's what we want to talk to you about today is how can you start holding some of those conversations that are going to be so essential to creating the psychosocially safe work environments that you all want. So here's where we're going to start. This is the work that we have been doing for the last 30 years. We have been looking at what are these tough, crucial conversations that are either driving organizations and individuals forward or holding them back. And what we identified is that there are three key characteristics that make a crucial conversation, that make one of these conversations and so hard to hold. So the three characteristics of a crucial conversation: high stakes. If you think about that criteria I just listed, the stakes are incredibly high in all of these. This really is about employee well-being and also organization well-being. Strong emotions. People care about this. This is deeply important to their lives, their families, their communities. Right? This is so much bigger than just the organization. So when people deeply care, it's almost inevitable that those strong emotions will come into play. And then the last one, and this is the one I want to just take a pause on a moment, is opposing opinions, differing perspectives. When we have a crucial conversation, it is crucial because you and I see things differently. And sometimes our desire, our hope is that actually the goal should be let's reduce that opposition. Let's reduce that difference. Let's just all try and see it the same way, right? It would be so much easier if we all thought the same. But we know that that is not the way to achieve the best, most lasting, most sustainable solutions. That in fact, we need the opposite. We actually need this opposition. We need these opposing opinions. And let me give you kind of one example of that to frame up how I want you to think about this for our conversation today. Because I think especially when we're talking about psychosocial safety and reducing stress and all of that, it seems like we should want to reduce conflict. And I just want us to be really careful in how we think about conflict. So let me give you an example. This fascinating piece of research. So this is Enrique Conterno. He was a senior vice president of a major American pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly, and he had responsibility over all of Lilly's product development, research and development of new drugs. And drug development, pharmaceutical development, if any of you are in the pharmaceutical field, it is a very complex process. And no one company or organization does the entire thing end to end. So in the United States, right, we have our federal government, the National Institutes of Health, large universities, we have multinational relationships with universities, right? We have small biotech startups, all sorts of different players are part of this process of pharmaceutical development. And at Eli Lilly, what they did was they created something, they formalized all those relationships in something they called the Lilly Alliance. And for years, this Lilly Alliance was in place. And every year, they would do a survey of the Alliance members to see how things are going. Think of it very much like any employee engagement survey when you're asking people how things are going, right? But in this case, they weren't just asking the employees, they were asking all of their Alliance partners. So they had all this data about how the Alliance and especially how these partner relationships were working, how these teams were working together. And then on the other side of the equation, Mr. Conterno had all this data about which projects actually worked, which ones got approval, which ones went to market, which ones created lasting health impacts for people, which ones had good financial returns, right? He had all this sort of outcome data. And so he looked at this and he said, I want to understand what aspects of the Lilly Alliance relationship create really great outcomes over here, right? Like, let's figure it out. If we can find that correlation, right? It's not necessarily causation, but can we find a strong correlation? And so they dug into the data and they were looking at all the different things that they had measured for years in the Alliance study. And they found something really interesting. One of the measures that they had asked about for years was about this idea of irritation, right? Irritation, conflict, differences of opinion. Oh, it's kind of hard to work with, frustration, right? Levels of irritation amongst the Alliance partners. And what they found is that as the levels of irritation increased amongst those Alliance partners, the level of outcome, right? What outcome happened? Also increased. They got better outcomes. The more irritation there was, the better the outcome. Now, this is kind of surprising because you think, wait, we don't want irritation, right? Like that seems frustration and conflict and irritation seems like the absolute opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here, right? And yet, this is what Enrique Quintero said. And I want us to think about this and use it a little bit as a frame as we talk about conversations that drive employee thriving. He said this: nothing great is achieved without some conflict. Right? If you want to do something great, if you want to create a workplace that is great, it's going to have some conflict. And here's why. Conflict sharpens the senses. It invites full engagement in solving important problems. That's what we're here to do. And then he said this, and I have a little bit of a chemistry background, so I love this if you're a chemist. He said, however, you must create more light than heat when you engage in conflict. Heat degrades the substrate of innovation. If you think about a chemical reaction with substrates, right? Heat degrades it, but light catalyzes it. I truly believe that this is true, that we need opposing opinions. We need these crucial conversations. We need differing perspectives to come together. And sometimes that will create a little bit of conflict, but we can do it in a way that is healthy and that unleashes light and insight and innovation and better results, rather than in ways that harm, that create heat or burn or friction to the point that that it is damaging, right? So that's what we want to talk about. How do we have differences? How do we bring all that diversity and all that difference of opinion about these very important topics? And how do we find a way through that unleashes that light, that brings us that great solution that we're looking at? So we're going to talk about how to do that in the context of conversation skills. And to start us off, let me, as we introduce this idea that we're going to be talking about specifically, let me give you another little quick example of a group of researchers that was interested in looking at what makes a really great team. In this case, it was Google. So about 10 years ago, Google was very interested in what makes great teams. And they have a ton of data. And so they started sifting through all the data they had on their tens of thousands of teams to see if they could figure out what makes a really great team. What creates this place where we have balanced workloads and we have reduced stress and we have good collaboration and we have high trust and we enjoy working together and we're doing great thinking, right? What creates that kind of a workplace, that kind of a team? And they looked at a variety of factors, right? Do we need to bring in the best people? Or is there something about personality styles, right? Should we be looking at introverts and extroverts and how they mix together? They looked at team structure, right? One of those key measures of psychosocial safety, right? Creating clear expectations and job requirements, right? What's the structure and what are people getting? They actually looked at friendshipping and socializing both in work and outside of work, to say, is there something about that when we get that magical kismet of friendship? Does that unlock a great team? And as they crunched all the data that they had about what created a great team, they found that actually none of the above had any kind of strong correlation with a successful team. Now, this was a little bit puzzling to them, the researchers inside Google who were working on this, because they were kind of at a loss. And they got to this point in the project where they said, we actually don't know what else to study. Like we don't understand what that elusive factor is that is driving some teams and workplaces to be great and others to be not. So they went into the social science research. They started reading through academic papers of what it takes to create great workplaces and intelligent teams, collective intelligence. And what they came across was this idea of psychological safety, not psychosocial safety. We'll come back to that in a minute, but psychological safety. And as they looked at the data on psychological safety, it seemed to really bear out everything that they were learning about teams at Google. And so they started looking through their own data and they realized that, yes, in fact, when they had teams who had higher degrees of psychological safety, those teams were reporting higher satisfaction and better results. This then seemed to be the elusive factor that created the best teams. Now, psychological safety, just as a kind of a tangent into the world of the research that it originally came out of, this idea of collective intelligence and team intelligence. When research, I think this is fascinating, but when researchers started trying to measure that kind of thing in experiments and controlled labs, not like out in the wild workplace where we all are, right? But in sort of lab settings and trying to figure out if they could tap into what really creates collective or team intelligence. And they first hit on this idea of psychological safety. They had to have a way to measure it. And the way that they measured it in those early research studies was really interesting. And I think is illustrative and informative about what psychological safety really is. They found that there were two factors that they would measure. One was what they called equality of distribution of conversational turn taking, which is kind of a mouthful, but it was right. If you break it down, equality of distribution of conversational turn taking, it's like a PhD's way of saying we take turns talking, right? Like that was an important measure or metric of psychological safety, that there was balance and turn taking in conversation. So that was the first metric. The other one that they found was so important that they could actually measure was what they called social sensitivity. So people that exhibited a higher degree of social sensitivity tended to create more psychological safety in a team, and that team then showed up as with greater collective or team intelligence. And you say, okay, well, social sensitivity, that sounds like something I would understand, but how on earth do you measure that? Well, they came up with a really interesting way to measure it. And if you're interested in your own degree of social sensitivity, you can still take this test online. It's called the Reading the Mind and the Eye test. And the way it works is they give you 36 questions, and they just give you this little, like you can see on the screen there, this little box, right, of someone's eyes. And then they ask you, what is this person feeling? So for this one, for example, apologetic, friendly, uneasy, dispirited. I would love it. In fact, let's just do this one right now together. Go ahead and chat in, if you will. Be brave, be bold, chat in. What is this person feeling right now? Apologetic, friendly, uneasy, or dispirited? Yes, very good. Okay, so yeah, most of us are going with uneasy. The answer for this one actually was uneasy. So this one was uneasy. I'm going to give you one more just to, again, kind of in the spirit of playing around, doing our own little social science experiments here. This one, irritated, disappointed, depressed, or accusing. What do you think this one is? Yes, wonderful. Accusing, right? So this one is accusing. I will tell you, I don't know, again, your backgrounds, if you're in organizational development, I've been teaching and training about crucial conversations for about 20 years now, and I was quite anxious when I took this test, as if the internet could tell me whether I was socially sensitive or not and good at my job. There was a little anxiety there, but it's a really fascinating way of thinking about how we could measure some of these things. Now, let me be clear. What I'm not saying is that in the workplace, we should be going around, like with little boxes and looking at everyone's eyes and trying to think it. But I think it's interesting if you think about those two metrics of psychological safety, conversational turn taking and social sensitivity, reading the mind and the eye. Both of these are very much measures of how much and how interested I am in you, in what you have to say, in whether I'm paying attention and thinking about how you might be feeling. They are very other focused measures of an individual's interaction, right? And that really is where we come down to what starts to create psychological safety. Now, Amy Edmondson is a professor of leadership and management at Harvard University, and she is probably right now the world's foremost scholar and researcher on psychological safety. And she describes psychological safety this way. She says, simply put, psychological safety makes it possible to give tough feedback and have difficult conversations, the kinds of conversations we're going to have to create psychosocially safe workplaces, right? Psychological safety makes it possible to have those conversations without the need to tiptoe around the truth. In psychologically safe environments, people believe that if they make a mistake, others will not penalize or think less of them for it. Now, one of the things that is so interesting about psychological safety is that it is fundamentally a team or an interpersonal construct. You can't actually be psychologically safe by yourself. Like psychological safety doesn't hold up in that context. It only exists within a team, a community, an interpersonal, a social construct, right? It only exists between people, not within someone, right? It is functionally a characteristic of a social system. Now, psychological safety and psychosocial safety are very intertwined, and it's worth taking a moment just to pull them apart a little bit to make sure we have a really good grounding in what they are. And actually, I don't know if Josh is still with us. I think Josh is. Josh, I think you had a great article, and maybe he'll share it at the end, that really goes into what the differences are between psychosocial safety and psychological safety. So psychosocial safety, as you know, and as you are working on it, is really about preventing harm to mental health. It's and in the sense that we do that, we are trying to address systemic risks in the workplace and reduce hazards, right? So it's a very systems-based work and is very much about harm prevention. Psychological safety is quite different in kind, as we've talked about it. It is a interrelational, interpersonal dynamic that is really rooted in the goal of fostering trust and openness. So we establish that by reducing the fear of judgment and embarrassment or rejection for speaking up, and really encouraging feedback. Now, one of the things that is key to understand about both of these two safeties, if you will, is that they operate in a virtuous cycle, right? So we've been talking about it from the sense of, if you can create psychological safety in a team, in a relationship, you're going to then enable people to start having the tough conversations about very difficult topics that will help them then implement the kinds of solutions they need in order to create a psychosocially safe workplace. And what we find in psychosocially safe workplaces, where people feel like their mental health is valued, where harms have been reduced, where investment has been made in employee thriving, in those kinds of workplaces, people are more likely to feel psychologically safe and speak up about things, right? So you get this virtuous cycle that gets started between this interplay with these two safeties. Now, as we think about it, we're going to start in one place, though. We're going to start with, if we want to start that virtuous cycle, where can we start it? And we'll start with how can we create psychological safety? So that's actually a question I have for all of you. And I want to take a moment in the chat to draw on the wisdom of the room here, because we've got some smart people on the webinar with us today. How have you done this effectively in your career, or how have you seen others do it effectively? How do you create psychological safety in a conversation, in a relationship? How do you create that? And let me just go back really quickly here for this definition. How do you foster that trust, that openness? How do you reduce that fear of judgment or embarrassment? How do you make it safe for people to openly, honestly, candidly speak up? I would love to just populate our chat with all the great ideas you have, and then I'll share a couple of what we've learned from our research about it as well. So just go to the chat here. Great. Okay, thank you, Linda. Listening without interrupting, so good. Sharing vulnerability, caring for the other person. Again, listening to the other person, seeing that come up quite a bit. Genuine and real relationships from the beginning. I love it. Jennifer, that's a really interesting one. Owning your own mistakes, right? Like, I reduce fear of judgment on you when I take ownership for my own mistakes as well. I love that. Validating, be vulnerable, active listening. Role modeling, absolutely. Great, great. Interesting. Andrea, or Andrea Hanna, lower your status, right? I don't know where you're coming from on that, but I'm mindful and thoughtful of Deborah Tannen, a great sociolinguist from Georgetown here in the United States, who did some just amazing work on communication and actually the very nitty gritty, right? She's a sociolinguist. She's really interested in specific words, and she was, as far as I know, one of the first decades ago now to talk about how we take a one up or a one down um, role in communication, right? And measuring that and looking at that specifically across gender dynamics. She really got into that. But I love that idea of like, I'm going to try and maybe equalize status there, right? Meet people where they are. Absolutely. Great. Okay. So many good ideas there. And I love it. One of the things, oh, they just keep coming. Watch the language that you are using. Although Fiona, it's so funny when that popped in, I was like, I need to watch the language I'm using. Like, am I, because what language have I used here? So I love that. I love that though. And coming from a place of humility and curiosity, so powerful. All of these are. And what I actually think is so interesting is there is a through line. I would like to suggest there is a through line between actually all of your answers and what they're doing and what our research has shown about what it takes to create psychological safety in the workplace. And this is what we have found in our research around psychological safety. It's this idea that people don't become defensive. People never become defensive about what you're saying. They become defensive because of why they think you're saying it. Right? So it's not the content of our conversation that's going to make you feel safe or unsafe. It's your perception of my intent. And said another way, right, we would say safety then, psychological safety in a conversation is all about intent, my intent and your perception of my intent, not the content of what we're talking about. And what I loved about your answers there is I think they all demonstrate intent, right? When I am actively listening, when I lower my status, when I share vulnerability, right? All of that is communicating my intent to hear from you. When I validate you, right? I'm communicating my good intent. So it's not about the content, which sometimes we think it is. We think, oh, you just can't talk about that because that's too incendiary, right? Right now, as you may know, in the United States, it's politics, right? Like we just can't talk about that because it's so incendiary, right? And the culture wars that we're in. And we have this idea that our ability to discuss a difficult topic is dependent upon the topic and the intensity of the topic. But when we really dig into it, what we see is no. Psychological safety, our ability to engage in this conversation and exchange meaning is really a function of what intent we are bringing. So with that, I want us to think about this idea of intent for just a little bit. Think about, if you will, this is where we're all going to get vulnerable together, okay? We be really honest and we can all be vulnerable together. I want you to think about a recent conversation, one that went poorly, okay? So this is not you at your best. This is you at your worst, right? Maybe it was you got really upset, right? Your teenager came home late after curfew, smelling of alcohol, and you lost it, right? Whatever it is, you got really upset. Maybe it was the opposite, right? Maybe you were in a really tough conversation, it wasn't going well, and you just gave in. You just thought, I don't even want to be a part of this. I just want to end this. I just want it to be over. So you just said, okay, yep, that's fine. That's how we'll do it. We'll do it your way. That's fine. Nope, I have no concerns. And you just ended the conversation. Maybe it was a social media kind of conversation, right? Where you read something online, it sort of triggered you and you used those thumbs to type out a post and hit post, all while still very, very angry, right? Or maybe you sent a snippy or sarcastic, kind of a passive aggressive text, right? So just a conversation that didn't go very well, okay? Once you've got that conversation in your mind, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just chat in one or two words, right? Be really honest, really vulnerable. There's no judging here. In that moment, when you said that thing, or you shut down, or you posted that thing, or whatever that was, what was your goal? What was your motive right in that moment when you did that thing? Not your overall goal, of world peace and all of that. But in that moment, oh, what was your goal? Okay, I see these coming in, right? Yes. Okay, great. I love it. To protect myself, right? To defend my own personal values, to be heard. I just want to be heard, right? Absolutely. To win. Yes, protect myself, to be heard, to stop the conversation, to be right. Fiona, you and I, right there. Usually what I want in it is I would like to be right, and I'd like you to acknowledge that you're wrong and then apologize to me for being wrong. I'd like all of that to happen. So, okay, I love those. I love those. And sorry, just without being at all, I just want to take seriously Deborah's comment, right? We've been talking a lot about psychological safety and how we're feeling in a conversation, and we need to acknowledge, and it's probably it is outside of the scope of this particular webinar, that sometimes these conversations do cross over into a place where there is real risk to personal safety, in which absolutely the appropriate thing is to pull back and seek help, right? So definitely don't want anyone to confuse anything I say with the implication that we should ever put our personal safety at risk, because that is so true, that these conversations and this idea of psychological safety at the extreme can get into that. And going back maybe to the more conversations where personal safety is not at risk, but we've gotten really upset. And if you're me, you wanted to be right, the other person to be wrong. This is what we find so often in conversations that don't go well, right? In those conversations that are not going well, if you really dig into it, you find that we've moved probably from having a good intent of dialogue that fosters psychological safety, an intent like finding the truth or learning, to one like winning or being right, or just being comfortable or staying in control. And when our intent moves to that left-hand column, that's when psychological safety starts to degrade, right? Because again, the safety that we bring to a conversation is all about our intent. So we have to start by knowing what our intent is. And sorry, let me just come back to this slide for just a moment. If you want to create psychological safety, you have to first start by bringing that good intent to that conversation. And I can already tell that you are so well familiar with that. We actually in our courses teach some skills for people when they've moved over to the left-hand side of, I just want to be right, or I just want to win, or I just want to stay in control, how they can employ some cognitive thinking skills to move back over to the right-hand side there, and that those intensive dialogue to get that longer term mutually focused thinking going on. But once you've got that good intent, so once you're centered on that good intent, the very first thing you should do in a conversation to create psychological safety is share it, is share that good intent. And I would say that probably 8 times out of 10, when I see a conversation, when I witness a conversation that has gone off the rails and in which psychological safety is missing, it has 8 times out of 10, it has been started without a statement of good intent. We have this sense that others will just assume what our good intent is. We know we have a good intent, and so we just jump into the conversation. But people, human beings, are hardwired. We are hardwired to detect and defend against threat, right? So if we don't know what's coming at us, if we don't know what is out there, we are going to assume the very worst. We have that negativity bias there. So it's so important in starting these crucial conversations to start with a statement of good intent, right? Whatever that sounds like. I've put some examples there on the slides so that you can think about what I mean by starting a tough, crucial conversation with a statement of good intent. These will sound different than the way that you will use that, because it needs to be authentic and in your own words. But this gives you an idea of sort of thinking about, how can I start a conversation with a statement of good intent? Now, as you look at those, one tip that I want to call out, because I see it so often when I am coaching people around crucial conversations, a statement of good intent is not the same thing as a statement of appreciation or praise. Sometimes we start a conversation by saying, oh, we need to have a tough conversation with someone. And we say, hey, I want you to know I really appreciated the great work you did last week on this project, or your presentation was just spot on, excellent work that you did there. And we start with this statement of appreciation or praise, right? And let me be clear, I love appreciation. I love praise. I think almost everyone does. Like, it's great to give. You should give it. But it is not the same. It does not create psychological safety in the same way that a statement of good intent does. Because you giving me appreciation and you giving me a compliment tells me nothing about why you're bringing up this tough topic, right? Why you're coming at me with this difficult, challenging conversation that we need to have. So just again, as you're looking at these statements of good intent, really dial that in and think about, what is that statement of good intent that I need to start with? Now, one other skill that we teach in our course that I want to give you a little bit of a sense of, because I think it's so critical. In most cases, when psychological safety is lost, and it's because people have misunderstood our intent, not because we don't have a good intent, but actually because people have just misunderstood it. And we teach a skill in our courses called contrasting to fix that misunderstanding. And I want to do just a little quick exercise with you here so you can see how this skill works. So let's say, for example, we'll do a little scenario here. Put yourself in this situation. Let's say you're in a project meeting and you're concerned about Deshaun's part of the project because he is working with vendors who've been unreliable in the past. You want to help his team by calling attention to it. So you speak up and you say, hey, I think Deshaun's piece is at risk. This is in the middle of the meeting, right? Maybe not the best way to handle it, but that's what you say. And Deshaun cuts you off defensively and says, whoa, hey, hey. That is not fair. You don't always make your deadlines either, you know? Okay, so let's just deconstruct this just a minute to think about this in the terms of psychological safety, right? We talked about how psychological safety is a team construct, and we're seeing in Deshaun's defensive response here that he likely does not feel safe at this moment. So the question is why? So go ahead and chat in for me really quickly. What does Deshaun think your intent was? Like, why did he get defensive? How has he interpreted your intent when you said, I think Deshaun's piece is at risk? Yes, to blame him, to attack him. Absolutely. He thinks it's personal and you're trying to criticize him. Exactly. Now, shifting gears just a little bit, and I know this is sometimes hard to do in the chat with time lag as you guys are chatting in, but let's shift gears. What was your actual intent in raising the issue, right? What was your actual intent? Yes, right? Prevention, absolutely, to highlight a risk, to help, like to help him succeed. You had all sorts of good positive things in your head and in your heart when you raised that issue, right? So this is a classic mismatch. So psychological safety has been destroyed, or at least harmed, right? Lowered because of a mismatch of intent and perception of intent. And as I said earlier, it's not your good intent that creates the safety, it's their perception of your intent. So this is a great place for a skill we call contrasting. Contrasting is a don't statement followed by a do statement. In the don't half of the statement, you highlight how people might have misunderstood your intent. So in this case, Deshaun has misunderstood my intent by thinking I was trying to criticize or blame him. The do half of my statement, I share what my actual real intent was. So for example, a contrasting statement in general sounds like something like, oh, my intent is not this. What I do want to focus on is that, right? I'm not trying to suggest. What I'm hoping we can solve is, my goal isn't to, I do want to discuss this, right? So if you think about that with Deshaun, it would look like this, right? You could say in that moment when Deshaun says, hey, that's not fair. You don't always make your deadlines either, you know? You could say, oh, Deshaun, I didn't mean to imply, right? So here's where I'm going to address the concern about his misperception. I didn't mean to imply that your team isn't capable. My concern is not with that. And then you follow it up with your statement of good intent, what you did intend. What I wanted to do was raise a potential concern about some of the vendors we're working with. Right? So this is a very simple, but very concrete, very actionable tactical skill you can use when someone becomes defensive, when psychological safety is at risk. What it is that you didn't intend, followed by what it is that you do intend. Now, I want to talk about just one last thing, and let me just jump to this here, and because I want to save time for Q&A and make sure that we get all of that addressed. One of the things that is so important to remember when we create psychological safety, and what we have learned in our years of working with it, is you have to be intentional about it. And sometimes very granular, I would say, about it. Psychological safety, making it safe in a conversation. It can seem sort of like this nebulous, touchy-feely, oh, let's sing a song together and group hug idea. But in reality, it is very concrete. It's very observable and very specific, the kinds of things that you can do and say to create safety. But as leaders in organizations, if we want to create psychologically safe workplaces so that we can create psychosocially safe workplaces, we have to be very deliberate about it. And I want to give you an example, a real life example of a leader who did just that. This on the screen, you're going to see, he's going to talk to you in just a minute, is a man named Rich Sheridan. He is CEO of a company called Menlo Innovations. They are a software development company. And you're actually going to see some images and video taken from their offices. It probably looks like unlike any software development company you've ever seen before. But they are incredibly intentional about creating a culture of, as Rich talks about it, a culture of joy. In fact, if you're ever interested, he wrote a book called Joy Inc. about how he left the software development industry because it was sucking his soul out of him. And he said, I'm going to create a different kind of company. I'm going to create a different kind of workplace, one that I would suggest to you does achieve some of the highest levels of psychosocial safety. But what I want you to watch for in this very specific example that he shares is just how intentional they are about architecting and implementing the behaviors that they need in their managers and their employees to create the kind of workplace they want. So let's watch.
What we had to create here was an environment where information could flow, even if it looks like bad news. And so the typical bad news report is when someone on the team goes over their estimates. My first accountability is to my team to tell them we will never punish you here for missing an estimate. Given that I've declared that, I need one thing back from them. If they ever get in trouble against their estimate, to simply raise their hand and say, we're going to miss it. We guessed wrong. So we have to teach our project managers who are going to receive this information a new kind of behavior. When that information is shared, we teach our project managers to look them in the eye, smile sincerely, and say thank you for sharing that information. Now, let's talk about what's going on. Most organizations want to squish bad news out. And where does bad news go? It doesn't disappear, it goes underground. It results in quality issues, morale issues, endless hours of overtime trying to meet these unrealistic expectations.
All right. So what I love about this example and what Rich teaches us here, and what I hope you were able to cue in on and hear him talk about, is how intentional they are to create the kind of psychological safety in this conversation. Sometimes it's easy to focus on, we need to teach our people to speak up, right? If we want to have effective dialogues and we want to be able to talk about all these tough issues and we really want to move our organization forward and we want to tackle these 10 criteria to create this transformative, safe environment where people can have true well-being, we've got to get everybody speaking up. And I'm not saying that Rich hasn't done training to help people speak up, but did you hear the other training that he does? We're very intentional, he says, about teaching our project managers that when someone brings you bad news, when someone does what you've asked them, when someone speaks up, to look them in the eye, to smile sincerely, to say thank you, and let's talk about this. This is the kind of intentionality that we need in order to create the kinds of workplaces that we want, where people will thrive. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And as you think about it, it does hinge on this fundamental idea that if we are going to create healthy workplaces where employees can thrive, we need to create relationships, teams, and organizations where we reduce that lag between identifying and discussing problems. And that means, yes, we do need everyone to be speaking up and sharing their ideas, but we also need to be teaching people how to respond to those differing opinions, how to respond to those opposing opinions, how to respond when something comes at us so that we can maintain and create that psychological safety so that we can smile sincerely, say, thank you, let's talk about this. And that is what it really takes. Now, as we've got about 10 minutes left, and here's what we're going to do with our time that is left. If you are sitting here thinking, wow, this is really interesting, I want to learn a little bit more, like, what can I do with this? Josh is going to share a couple of things that you can do to continue your learning journey around some of these ideas. And then that'll just take a minute or so. And then we're going to come back together and do Q&A. I'm going to be scanning through the chat. If you did have an opportunity to chat a question in, that's great. If you haven't yet, but you want to ask a question, please go ahead and chat it in now. And we'll have about 10 minutes or so for the chat. So with that, Josh, tell us a little bit about what are some opportunities people have if they have additional, if they want to continue this journey.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. That was fantastic, as always. So really appreciate that. Look, I'm just scanned through some of the people attending. There's definitely people who are very familiar to us and programs in their organisation. So welcome. For those that aren't, typically we work in 3 different areas where you can get going. You may just want to to do it for your personal development. You may want to do it for your team. You may want to look at it, more across your organisation, which we typically work with. But our public programs, we're now moving those to in-person. We were doing those virtually for a couple of years now, but there's been really strong feedback. We want to get back in person. So we are kicking those off in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and Perth in May, 13 and 14, and beyond in the rest of the year. So really looking forward to getting people back in the room for those. So that's a great way that if you wanted to individually do it, or it could be a couple of yourself and a couple of colleagues that may want to do it, and you're able to really get a sense of it and whether that may apply back into your organisation. We run in-house programs, so that might be for your organisation where you're looking to really embark and pilot crucial conversations in your organisation. So we would come in and deliver that specifically to your organisation, which is quite common with our organisations we work with. The last one that we are seeing quite a high uplift in is around trainer certification. So for organisations that are L&D, OD, HR business partners that are really out in the ground looking to drive this behavioural change and cultural change in your organisation, we do train the trainer certification. So doing the program for 2 days and then you go through a 2-day certification would then enable you to then deliver that internally in your organisation. So really powerful way for contextualisation and personalisation to the nuances of your company, really flexible and scalable to how you want to deliver it. So that's typically the 3 areas that we work with.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Josh, I'm just going to interrupt you. I know someone said earlier that the way to create safety was not interrupt, but I did want to just interrupt you on something.
I'm safe with you.
I mean, you're right. Trainer certificate, and I'm glad you mentioned contextualization. Like, I almost would love to argue on this slide that it should say most popular and effective way to implement the learning. And I will just tell the group here, I know from research that we have done that well, this is going to sound arrogant, that if I go into an organization and train them in crucial conversations, they'll have a good experience, right? I tend to get very good evaluations. So do our master trainers. Like, it's great. But here's the thing, in terms of sustainable learning and actual change, when we have people embedded in the organization, leaders like you who are doing the training and who can make it real and continue that sustaining journey with them, we know that it's more effective in terms of that overall goal we want, which is not happy faces on an eval sheet, but is actually meaningful change. So I just a double click and a ditto to that trainer certification as a great way to start.
Yeah, hopefully, Talitha, I can see your question there. That answers it, but we'll be providing an email after the webinar with all details if you want to contact. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a sense. Just briefly, so the webinar series, we tick this one off. The next one, which is in April, which is really related to our Crucial Influence program, which Emily was a part of, as well as accountability, which is really looking at the 6 sources of influence, how it shapes organizational culture. And then the last webinar, which is the art of caring accountability and that relationship to not sacrificing well-being in your organization. We all struggle with that at times. I know I have done in my professional life. And that's going to be kicking off in June. So what you can see here is Crucial Conversations, first webinar, into Crucial Influence, into Crucial Accountability. You're going to get a really good taste of how the programs really fit together in an organization. All right, we might just open into Q&A. Let's have a look here.
Yeah, perfect. And I can share. Oh, sorry. I was gonna just jump in, Josh. One of the questions, and we sort of got to Talitha's question a little bit about, but I think there's worth saying a little bit more about how do we introduce this into our workplace and implementing. So Josh did a great job of saying, like, here's different ways to bring this training in. I would also say that I think Crucial Dimensions has a lot of really great resources to soften the ground, if you will, right? If you're not quite ready to make that whole leap into training, webinars like these and other light touch resources, reading articles. I know they have some great videos that help people start thinking about it, and especially thinking about the problem. So one of the things that I think is great about Crucial Conversations, and it was lovely to like see Fiona, see your message, grateful that you brought it in and had good experiences and thinking about it. But one of the great things about Crucial Conversations is, honestly, it can apply to a lot of different things. That's also, quite honestly, a little bit of a weakness from a transformational change perspective, because you give someone a skill and they're like, but it applies to everything. Where do I start? So one of the things that I think is really helpful as you think about implementing it in your own organization is kind of dialing in and saying, why are we doing this? Like, hopefully you on the webinar feel like, oh, better communication is self-evident, right? Of course, that's a good, valuable thing. But it's helpful to make that business case of, we think this is going to help us improve on these areas of psychosocial safety, or we think this is going to help us improve in this area of our business or address this concern, and make that linkage between pain or problem that people are experiencing and the skill. Once they've got it, they'll generalize it to other areas. But that's just one thought as you think about how to start kind of softening that ground and being a champion for it within your organization. Josh, I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at the questions. We're all in a similar route here. So first one there is, what Australian organisation? So I think that was Sanaya, I think it is. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So we work with across industries. If you go to our website, you can see the span of industries. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with communication. So education, health, mining, financial services, you name it. Organisations we work with a lot in Catholic education. We work with Clanaway, big waste management. We work with Rio Tinto, large government agencies. So you can see there's just such a diversity there. But it's organisations where their leaders are committed to behavioural change. That is the absolute key. If we're thinking that this is just going to be a bottom-up build and we're going to do it, it's got to be, you'll probably see it on LinkedIn. I say it a lot, and I say, over and over, is leaders need to learn it. They need to then model it, and then they need to advocate it. And if you get that formula right, this thing will fly. And the impacts that we see with organizations, not just in the workplace, but in the personal side, is significant. So that's what I'd certainly recommend, in terms of the companies, industries we work with. We're very agnostic in that respect. How I see organizations kick this off, really, it's about piloting. So they'll typically pilot with more of a senior leaders group or a leadership team that have an interest in this, in what they want to do around what Emily said, some of the challenges they want to solve in their organization. And then those, we typically can deliver the programs to you. But as Emily said, a lot of organizations then, if they've got L&D, OD teams or people that are real champions for it, and have facilitation experience, because it's very instructional design, I would really encourage the trainer route. Is just a great way to then really start to spread it within an organization. Very cost effective as well.
Just a note on that, and then I wanted to jump to another question. I know, and by the way, I know some of you are starting to drop off, which we understand. We're going to stay late, which shouldn't imply that you need to stay late. Draw that boundary for your time. But as long as you want to stay and have questions, Josh and I are here. I will just note, and I appreciated this from Paula. It just happened that it came right in on the exact minute, but exactly underneath Sinea's question about like, would you suggest starting with the books and drip feed it? And then Paula right there said, yeah, that's actually what we did. We required our team to read Crucial Conversations book, which is a great way to get people exposed to the idea. And now we're holding the training sessions. I think what people find when they read the book is there's a lot of insights, right? When I talk to people who've read the book, they'll say, oh my gosh, there were such great insights and things like that. And I would say that some people have, I don't know if emotional intelligence is the right way to say it, but just have the capacity to take those insights from the book and actively change their behavior with them. And that is awesome. We also recognize that there are a lot of people who will read the book and think, that was really cool. and then nothing changes at all. And that's where the training comes in to say, let's give people practice examples. Let's give them application options. Let's force them to actually put into words how they're going to use and say this and practice it. So that training can really make those insights come alive. There was also a question that I wanted to jump to, and then Josh, maybe I'll send it back over to you to talk about the recording questions. We've had a couple of questions about whether this will be available or not.
Yeah, sure.
But Paula, you had a great question about resources for older kids, youth, and young adults. We don't have necessarily a course per se for that particular audience. That being said, and I can work with Josh to make some of these resources available. Here in the US, we have some great Q&A questions. Specifically, I'm thinking of some that Joseph Grenny has done over the years about how to have crucial conversations with your kids, how to help them have crucial conversations. And we recently, I know a colleague of mine did a webinar recently around kind of crucial conversations and families and kids and things like that. Not exactly sure that any of that's exactly on topic for what you're looking for, but I will get those resources and we'll reach out. I think I can commit on behalf of us, Josh, that between Josh and I and Stephanie, we'll reach out, Paula, with some of those resources specifically around like kids and youth and things like that. But with that, Josh, do you want to address the question of recording?
I'll finish off, but thank you so much, Emily, first and foremost. Lovely to get back with you and get you talking to our Australian people again. Really looking forward to the next two webinars. I've had a sneak peek of those, and I think there's a huge amount in those, and you'll get a really good sense of other aspects that we cover with organisations, but particularly its link into greater wellbeing in organisations. We'll be sending out an email shortly. It will have the recording in it. There will be a short survey. If I can ask you, that would be great. We always want to improve the way that we engage with clients and those that are exploring things. So it'll take you less than 30 seconds just to fill that out. And my details are on there. So there's a number of questions here around where do we start, etc. You'll have my details on there. Please just reach out on email or mobile, whatever you like, and I'm more than happy to take you through. Listen to really exploring some of the areas that you're looking to tackle, and then whether what we do can align to supporting you in that. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for your time. And again, thank you, Emily, for an amazing webinar. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks. Bye.